you a bored hound. Jeez. We'll get to ya.
Okay, this first one is called Forgetfulness. She bent over and placed the car seat on the floor of the frozen food section. The baby sucked at its cheeks, but otherwise remained undisturbed. She protected her from the draft by covering her face with a blanket. "Don't let me forget the eggs," she told the infant, wagging a finger as if she knew. The woman had only planned on stopping in for one or two items, but as expected, soon found just a simple shopping basket inadequate. It was when she dropped the creamer on the floor that she decided on upgrading to the cart. The woman picked up the carton of half and half and placed it back in the basket next to a loaf of bread and some lunch meat. Then she made her way to the front of the store. The cart was trapped in the corral. After wiping it down with a complimentary sanitation wipe, she grabbed the bright red handle and tugged. It clattered in protest, but eventually pulled free from the others. She placed her purse within the cart and pulled a shopping list written on the other side of a crumpled up receipt from her pocket. She went over the list. Everything had already been checked off except for the eggs and the toilet paper. The woman looked up from the receipt and noticed the decorative reindeer strung from the ceiling, spinning. "Have yourself a merry little Christmas" came on softly over the loudspeakers. To herself, she said eggs, so she wouldn't forget. "Don't forget the eggs," she said again. Cart turned towards the aisle. She frowned slightly. "Eggs," she said. But the toilet paper was right there. She wouldn't forget the eggs. As she started down the aisle, the cart began to rattle. The woman resituated the cart, but it wasn't any use. It was a bad wheel. She rolled the sleeves of her coat to examine her watch and, alarmed, pushed on with the lame cart. Her daughter had to be picked up from practice within the hour, and her youngest son was due at Scouts. The wheel went on squeaking every few seconds or so. After picking up the toilet paper, the woman remembered something and took a detour through the hot food court before stopping in front of a soup stand where she went over all the different bubbling options. Vats of chili gurgled, the black beans simmered and burnt. She even saw vegetable beef, but they had the best chicken dumpling soup there, and her husband had asked her to get him some as a side with dinner. Hastily, she plunged a ladle into the vat of the chicken dumpling, raised it, and plopped thick, steaming clumps of it out into a paper cup. She took some of the free saltines and plasticware and placed it all together in the cart. The woman hesitated for a moment while she considered that cart. She looked down at her watch again before pushing onwards toward the aisle labeled Healthy Living. There was just enough time to get a little bit of next week's shopping done, and her son was on a very specific diet. She spent the better part of 15 minutes looking at the veggie burgers, flipping over the packages for calorie count and nutrition, examining the low-sugar puddings. Wasn't imitation sugar just as bad as the real thing? He had mentioned that to her, but she couldn't remember. She shrugged and put the Griller's Choice veggie burger in the cart before placing the pudding back on the shelf. Just then, she thought of cupcakes. Her other daughter had turned 12 over the weekend and insisted that they bake cupcakes to share with the rest of her class. She argued that her birthday was already over, and the daughter broke down in tears and cried that everyone else did it for their birthdays, that she didn't want to feel left out. The woman understood this, but not enough to turn her kitchen into a bakery. She considered the flour, the icing, the mess that she would later have to manage, and knew it was something that she didn't want to deal with. At least she already had the eggs. She checked her watch. Her son would be finished with basketball practice soon, but the school was at least a 15-minute drive out, and it had been snowing. She pushed on toward the baking goods, weaving between other shoppers as though they were cars riding along the highway. Twice she stopped abruptly to avoid colliding head-on with the other cars, and twice they exchanged pained smiles before ducking past one another in an unpleasant game of grocery store chicken. Both times the wheel shrieked when she turned, and the woman regretted not going back for another cart when the chance had presented itself earlier. In the time it took getting over to the bakery section, she had dropped the idea of anything homemade altogether, deciding instead on the Little Debbie's red velvet cupcakes. She placed 2 boxes in the cart and was done with it. The woman made one final stop in the liquor aisle. She picked up a 6-pack of Goose Island for her husband and a bottle of Chardonnay for herself. A smile flashed across her face, and things were momentarily pleasant. When Here Comes Santa Claus began playing, she pushed the cart toward the checkout aisle, forcing herself to ignore the squeal below. Of course there had been a line, and when she finally got to the register, it was a kid working it, so the woman had to wait while one of the customer service managers was called over to ring her out. Before leaving the store, she stopped and fastened her coat, leaving a scarf tightly around her face. Halfway home, she hit a red light. Her hands readied on the wheel, and she adjusted the rear view, and oh, for Christ's sake, she cried out in a start, struck with a sudden and terrible realization. She rummaged through the bags in the passenger seat and even some in the rear before feeling her stomach bottom out. It was the eggs. She forgot the damn eggs. She did a U-turn and sped back toward Mariano's. Huffing, she approached the frozen food section. It had been snowing, her boots wailed against the tiles as she marched, out of breath, through the other merry shoppers. Double-checking that the eggs were indeed there, she grabbed the carton and mumbled to herself while glancing between it and the shelf. She even tested the packaging with her fingers to make sure that she wasn't going nuts. The woman nodded and took a small step back. She once again motioned toward the checkout, but stopped in place and stared. Sitting on the floor was the baby, undisturbed. The blanket was pulled down and within her tiny fingers, and she smiled up at the woman with a small, blanking face. This next one is called Leviathan. I've never flown before, though I told her that I had once when I was younger. I didn't know what to expect outside of things I've seen in movies, and I wondered about this as we killed time in an airport bar waiting for our flight to allow boarding. I pushed around the leaves of the salad and absently studied a man in a suit while he placed his briefcase on the floor before bending over to tie his shoe. My girlfriend, fiance, was concentrating on her phone as she finished off her second Bloody Mary. She seemed happy. The veins in her ruddy cheeks were broken, and whatever she had been reading caused her to chuckle lightly. I took another sip of my own beer before offering her what was left out of the half-finished glass. She asked me if I was sure that it would help calm my nerves, but I shook my head and told her I was fine. I'm fine, I said. My leg bounced anxiously beneath the table as I tore a napkin into pieces, scattered it, put it back together like a jigsaw puzzle. You're going to love Arizona, she told me before listing off all the different reasons why I will love Arizona. Just imagine, no more Chicago winters. She almost sighed in relief before resigning once again to her phone. I reminded her that I enjoyed Chicago winters, or just weather in general, I guess. I was mumbling. She placed her phone on the table and smiled at me before taking a long, slow drink of the beer. She grabbed my hand gently and stroked it with her fingers. Her eyes were dark and appeared soothing amidst the frantic bustle of the airport. When the beer was finished, I flagged down the girl working the bar and paid the check before we took our seats over by the gate. I glanced at my ticket and then looked around. Most of the other seats were vacant as it was still pretty early, and I watched from the window as plane after plane landed and emptied. Workers, buried from the cold in thick neon coats, rushed about, dragging hoses, driving carts around the runway. Some scurried to refuel while others heaved suitcases and bags on top of conveyor belts. One of them kept on tossing luggage behind him without looking. He must have missed 3-4 bags, and I considered those bags as the passengers boarded. Eventually, the massive tires began to churn and pick up speed. The window rattled faintly as the plane trundled from the ground and disappeared into the crisp, full sky. Beside me, my fiancée was nodding off. Her breath grew heavy as she sulked in her sleep. Feeling queasy, I turned away from the window and stared at a spot on the carpet. I cupped my hands over my kneecaps and held them there. Slowly, the empty seats began to fill as people trickled over to the gate. I glanced at my watch and adjusted it upon my wrist. My fiancée, whose head rested on my shoulder while she napped, stirred and stroked my forearm. I saw her neatly kept nails with smooth cuticles. I kissed the top of her head and gently stood up. She mumbled and protested and blindly swiped at a few errant strands of hair from her sweating forehead. I removed my sweatshirt and bunched it under her like a pillow and made my way over to the bathroom, stopping once or twice to observe new and unrelated cancellations or delays posted next to some flight centers. On my way back, I was searching a vending machine when I noticed this couple, this man and a younger woman, sitting closely together on the floor. It didn't appear as though they belonged together, though the printed tickets gathered between them suggested that they were on the same flight. I saw the flight number and vaguely remembered it as being one of those that had been canceled. The man was 30-something and somewhat chubby. His hair was thin and brown, and on his face was a friendly, exhausted expression. But when he smiled at the woman, he did so with his eyes as well as his mouth. I took my time deliberating between sun chips or Reese's cups, staring sideways at the two of them over on the floor. The guy was fidgeting with his wedding ring, and when he looked nervously towards the woman, I noticed that she wasn't wearing her ring before deciding on M&Ms. He said something and she laughed. The woman, who was someone younger than him, looked attractive and lean. She threw her hair back and exposed the deep grooves of her collarbones. He mimicked the movement of her head with his own. A jacket that she had drawn over her legs like a blanket slipped onto the floor and her knees bent together. She leaned forward and covered her teeth with a hand and laughed harder. I punched in the code for M&Ms but wasn't paying attention and mistyped. That was when I saw him slip the ring into the pocket of his slacks. The vending machine groaned before releasing a bag of sunflower seeds. I reached down into the tray and pulled out my bag. I tore the packaging and stuffed a few seeds in my mouth when the two on the floor seemed to come to some kind of agreement. The man stood and stretched out his hand before helping her to her feet. Then, two of them went off together before disappearing through the rushing knots of travelers. I stood staring dumbly in the direction they went off in and ate some more seeds, spitting the spent shells into a trash can nearby. It was nearly time to board when I returned to where my fiancée was sitting over by the gate. Now, the seats were almost completely filled, and there was a tentative bristle of conversations crossing over one another in the excited lobby. I shook my fiancée awake. She looked up at me and smiled, stretching. I looked around the place and started to sort of work my thumb in its socket so there was a slight popping, a nervous habit. My fiancée noticed and grabbed my hand. She whispered something to me that I couldn't make out of the growing buzz, so I smiled and she kissed my fingers. We gathered our carry-ons and prepared to walk over to the standing line. I patted my back pocket to check for my wallet. I went over our things 2 or 3 times to make sure it was all there. Then we walked together over to the little podium by the gate. We were first in line for boarding. I insisted on paying extra so our positions and lines got bumped up, that we could sit together and choose exactly where to sit. Once on the plane, I struggled fitting my carry-on within the overhead compartment and took my seat by the window just overlooking the wing. One by one, my eyes groped every passenger that walked in search of some kind of vague threat. When everyone was settled in, the pilot introduced himself and the crew. Then, the attendants gave a quick demonstration of the different safety measures: how to fasten a seatbelt, that your cushion doubles as a flotation device, to secure your own mask first before helping others. A sudden tenseness seized my chest as I watched the attendants fix the masks to their faces and flourish their hands as if they were hosting an infomercial. I saw my fiancée look at me sympathetically. I gave her a weak look. "I'm not nervous," I said, but she knew. I turned towards the window. The light snow was dusting the tarmac. At once there was a great start and the plane jerked forward. The wings began a crazed twitching of panels, and I watched wildly as the strips of yellow paint marking the runway started to pass by faster. Just then the engines flared. A violent, vacuous howling split the cabin, and I was cemented into my seat. My hand clawed at the armrest as the aisle appeared to lengthen and stretch. I fumbled with the safety belt, shaking, pulling it tighter and tighter against my waist until it grew difficult to breathe. I drew in a sharp breath and worked on the buckle. A small, soft hand, unashamed, embraced my own sweating fingers as the plane, great Leviathan, tore away from the ground, and what little I knew of Earth disappeared behind me at increasingly distant lengths. I got one really quick thing to read. I dedicate this to the Arizona Ice Cowboys in the back. It's called Dusk. Awaken in dusk, fingers curling, clutching the cloth. Drop down clouds clot the sun. In the distance, a city of glass, with pristine, transparent towers, their banners torn, slumbers. Thunderous snores bowl through the streets, which went sticky in the evidence of a good time. We turn our hands upwards, praying for our comatose gods, bankrupt of honor, to bring us rain.